The former Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was not poisoned. French scientists say polonium did not play a part in his death. Ukraine's Prime Minister Mykola Azarov has survived a no-confidence vote after he apologised for a police crackdown on demonstrations. And Thai police have allowed protesters to enter government headquarters to diffuse tension ahead of the King's birthday. Hello, you're watching France 24, live from Paris. I'm Karen Roberts. A French forensic report has concluded that Yasser Arafat was not poisoned. This contradicts earlier findings from a Swiss investigation and has caused confusion for Arafat's widow. It's still unclear how Arafat died 9 years ago. Charlotte Hawkins has more.
Contradictory findings, reigniting the debate over Yasser Arafat's death. The Palestinian leader's widow, Suha Arafat, has expressed her shock over the conclusion of French forensic experts who say he died a natural death. The French report comes just a month after Swiss experts announced they favoured the theory that he had been poisoned.
You can imagine how shattered I am by these contradictions by the best European experts on this subject. Obviously, I have total trust in the courts and in the science, as long as the experts are in agreement.
Arafat died in Paris in 2004. His body was exhumed last year for tests after radioactive substance polonium was discovered on his personal effects.
There are those who say it's the polonium inside Arafat's body that contaminated his clothes. That's the Swiss. And then there are those who say it was the radon on the outside that contaminated his body. And that's the French. Everything must be done to find out the truth.
Suha Arafat has filed a civil suit at a court in a Paris suburb, accusing an unnamed perpetrator, X, of murdering her husband. A number of Palestinian leaders are demanding an international inquiry. Some of them suspect the blame may lie with Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service.
An opposition bid to bring down the Ukrainian government has failed in Parliament. Prime Minister Mykola Azarov has survived a no-confidence vote after he apologised for a police crackdown on demonstrations. Meanwhile, thousands of Ukrainians continue to gather in Kiev, protesting at the government's rejection of an EU pact. Siobhan Silk has more.
Outside the Parliament building, thousands of protesters demanding the government's resignation, just a fraction of the hundreds of thousands who've gathered over the last weeks. But inside Parliament, the opposition didn't have the support it needed. 186 MPs voted in favour of the no-confidence motion, well short of the 226 required for it to pass. Before the vote, opposition MPs slammed the president for being beholden to Moscow.
It's an issue of dignity and injustice, an issue that has existed in Ukraine for 3 years. It's about the humiliation of the Ukrainian people and negligence regarding the rights and freedoms of Ukrainians. This is a stolen country, and it's been stolen by Viktor Yanukovych.
Anti-government sentiment has been further fuelled by the police crackdown on the protests.
Outraged Ukrainians went to the streets to hold peaceful demonstrations. The young people had no political slogans. They had Ukrainian national flags, but the police dispersed them with batons. That had never happened in the history of independent Ukraine.
Prime Minister Mykola Azarov apologised in Parliament for the harsh police action. He also promised to reshuffle his cabinet. The opposition isn't satisfied. After the vote, leaders vowed to continue their campaign and blockade the Parliament building to prevent the government from working.
In a surprise move, Thai police lifted their defence of government headquarters and allowed protesters in. It offered what some consider to be a face-saving way to end the demonstrations. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has invited people to a forum to exchange views. Many believe that the King's birthday, due on Thursday, is the reason behind the sudden change in tactics.
Protesters shaking hands and hugging police. The atmosphere in Bangkok has changed. On Tuesday, after days of violent clashes, police helped demonstrators bring down barricades that protected government offices. This new strategy comes days ahead of the king's birthday celebrations. Still, opposition activists vow to topple the cabinet, which they say is controlled by former ousted Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra.
No, it's not over. This is the start of the new politics. We need to reform our politics and other agencies, such as the police. We need to change all of them, so the country will benefit from the revolution of the people.
While anti-Thaksin protesters plan the next phase of their attempt to topple the elected government, Thaksin's sister, the current Prime Minister, called for dialogue.
I would like to invite academics, businessmen, and groups from all walks of life, including political protesters, to work together and hold a forum to express their opinions, to find an answer and reform the political situation into a democratic system with the king as its leader.
Regardless, demonstrators say they want Ingluk Shinawatra out, hinting that they plan to resume their action once the king blows out his birthday candles.
US Vice President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet on Wednesday in Beijing. China's declaration of a new air defense zone above disputed islands in the East China Sea has pitted the US and China against each other. Earlier, Biden was in Japan, where he publicly rebuked China for trying to enforce its will on its neighbours. The US Vice President is on a week-long tour of Asia. The situation in the Central African Republic continues to deteriorate as former Seleka rebels terrorise villages and local militias spring up. France has 600 soldiers already stationed in the country and another 350 on the way from Cameroon. This week, the United Nations will vote on whether to give the mission a UN mandate.
French troops on an assault ship in Cameroon. They're waiting to find out whether the UN will authorise their deployment in the Central African Republic. The UN Security Council will vote on Thursday on a French-drafted resolution to undertake military action in the African nation. France has already begun sending troops to its former colony to support an African Union mission. Thursday's vote will determine whether action will fall under a UN mandate.
I think the main objective will be to restore order in the Central African Republic. At this point, it's difficult to know if the African force, with the support of the French one, will be in a position to do that job.
The Central African Republic has slipped into chaos due to increasing sectarian violence between armed Christian and Muslim groups. President Michel Djotodia dissolved the Seleka rebel group, which helped bring him to power in a coup earlier this year. But the current militia groups are beyond the president's control. A tenth of the population have fled their homes, and the UN warns that the Central African Republic could spiral into genocide.
The World Bank points to corruption as one of the greatest barriers to economic development, and it's one that's widespread. The latest Corruption Perceptions Index, published by NGO Transparency International, shows that 2/3 of countries worldwide are weighed down by secret dealings and bribery. Siobhan Silk has more.
Nordic countries are again among the cleanest places to do business and deal with government institutions. They dominate the top spots on Transparency International's annual Corruption Perceptions Index, along with New Zealand and Singapore. France is in 22nd place, the same as last year.
If you compare it to the Scandinavian countries, but also other countries in the Eurozone, there's a long way to go. And there has been some positive developments this year in terms of improved legislation, but corruption in France is clearly an issue which isn't being taken seriously enough.
At the bottom of the ranking are conflict-scarred South Sudan, Sudan and Afghanistan, as well as hermit state North Korea and Somalia, which was without a functioning central government for 2 decades. Worryingly, most countries were awarded under 50 points on a scale of 100.
Corruption in those countries, 2/3 of the 177, is still to be seen in a very critical situation.
That group includes EU members like the Czech Republic, Croatia, Italy and Greece. But Transparency International says even though the overall trends are concerning, there is some positive movement, with several nations, including Greece, making headway in fighting graft.
Well, that's it for now. More news coming up. Do stay with us here on France 24.